joy is actually what oppression wants to be squashed out of us. And the more joy I can have, the more I can fuel myself to hold everyone who doesn't believe they deserve it yet.
What if the key to transformation lies in shifting your perspective? Hi, I'm Dr. Payal Beri. Welcome to Reframing Perspectives. Every conversation here is about one thing: how empathy changes the way we lead, connect, and create impact. Each episode, we get to explore deep, authentic conversations designed to expand your mindset. Whether you're looking to transform your leadership, deepen your relationships within your circle, your community, and friends, or gain clarity in your own personal growth, each episode will inspire you to see things differently and take action. If you're ready to challenge your thinking and embrace transformation, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. How do you find moments of joy when you're constantly surrounded by grief, when you're hit by news that is so devastating? How do you find joy? How are you allowed to be joyful? What does that even mean? This is something that was just such a powerful topic and such a powerful way of thinking, because all of us, every single one of us, have had moments, have had phases, have had chapters, have had experiences where we have just dealt with such intense level of grief that we don't know how can we even experience joy, that we feel guilty about having joy. Well, I got to talk to Dr. Tanmeet Sethi, who is a phenomenal integrative and psychedelic medicine physician. She's an activist and author. She wrote her book, Joy is My Justice, Reclaim Yours Now. And she talks about this radical claim that joy is our birthright and the deepest liberation that we can know, and a path to power through oppression is by reclaiming our joy. She does phenomenal work in some of the most marginalized communities in Seattle. But what was powerful was our conversation wasn't just about her work. It was about how her own experience in her home, things that have happened with her son that have forced her to really look at how she is experiencing joy in a daily battle around grief. And I can't wait to dive in with this with you guys and to really hear what you guys all think, because I think this is a topic that we tend to shy away from talking about, but is really important for us to reclaim joy as our justice. Hello, one of my favorite humans ever.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so excited. I miss your face, and I'm just so happy to talk about one, just the incredible work, everything you do, because there's so much love and integrity and passion and commitment and honesty and just love that flows through you.
Mm.
And I think it's just so critical for everyone and listeners to just know who you are and know your story and know what you're doing, because I think it could be so impactful for every human and the cellular level of every human.
Aw, thank you. That means a lot to me coming from you, Pyle.
So I want to actually just dive in. You obviously wrote the book, Joy is My Justice, and powerful book. I've read it
Thank you.
3 times.
Mm.
And actually, last year when I was on my trip to Mammoth Mountains in Thanksgiving, I actually took it with me there too. I just felt like it was a great book for being in the mountains and stuff. But I want to actually start with asking you, if you could just take us back down memory lane and talk about what was the root of joy in your childhood? What did joy mean to you when you were a kid?
Yeah. I don't honestly think I knew what joy meant. I think that a lot of my childhood, I had a very beautiful family and my parents were amazing. And I feel like they worked their butts off to try to give us everything. But there was a lot of that sort of, like we have to work hard and keep working hard and do well. And there wasn't any room for sort of pleasure, and pleasure was frivolous. We didn't spend extra money on anything. We didn't go do anything that people, I mean, the things I do now for pleasure, like my parents would never do, because they were always working. And if they weren't working, they were working on figuring out how to work more and take
Right.
care of
And that's
us.
such an immigrant experience, right? Or just
Yes.
that idea of you got to, what do you mean joy? What do you mean fun? Study more. That's your fun. Go to the library. That's fun.
Yeah. And so now when I look back on it, I mean, I knew that then, but now when I look back, I also see that I also wasn't really taught how to experience pain. And so I think that's also why I didn't really know joy, which, relates to a lot of my work now. But, my parents were really hardworking and also kind of, we'll do what we can with what we have and we'll make do with what happens. And things are hard, but you just keep going. And they had all good intention. I just wasn't really allowed to be sad, or that wasn't a good thing.
Yeah, it's really powerful. I hear this a lot where it's like, I don't know what it means to be happy. I don't know what it means to be joy. And it's like you have to break it down into like almost like a practical thing for people to get it, because if they grew up in that space of scarcity and they grew up in that space of like, it's almost like you should feel guilty for
Mhm.
wanting to do that. And then I see this all the time. I see, friends of mine as well, like where they justify themselves out of something that they really would bring them joy. But, then they're like, but practically that doesn't make sense to spend on. So, why bother? And so then they've defined it to being like, well, I'm just a very practical person. So,
Yeah.
I don't need those things. Right. And it becomes such an ingrained identity of it. And there are people who are just generally that's what they are. They're practical and, their version of joy is different. But what do you find like now you said that, your experience of joy and the way you experience it now is like so different than how you grew up and what was allowed. How did you work through that?
Yeah. Well, I don't think, honestly, I worked through it until I had a large tragedy in my life. And so I think I kind of went through the motions until, as you know, until I was pregnant with my third child. And I found out that my second one at the time, who was not even 3 at the time, was diagnosed with a fatal and degenerative disease. It's like an ALS in young boys. And that felt like my world crashed down on me, that you can sort of move through and push through until something so bad happens that you can't push through anymore. And it also was something so hard that I hadn't seen before. So I had experienced racism and misogyny and all kinds of real power struggles going through medicine as a smaller brown woman. But all of that seemed like I could get solidarity with other people on. I could have community to forge through it. And this was the first time I had experienced such a big tragedy that nobody had role modeled for me. I mean, thankfully, but also no one around me knew how to navigate it. And so that was when I think push came to shove and I really had to figure out, what is joy, but is it ever going to be available to me again?
Wow. How did you, when you aren't taught to work with those emotions and you don't even have the tools, you don't even know how to navigate that. And then you don't have community around you to even understand what you're going through. How did you navigate that?
Yeah. I mean, I really think that I turned towards community that I had already been sinking into to learn skills around trauma and mind body medicine and my mentors who had been training me. And I sort of fell into that and said, how am I going to do this? And I asked them for help, and they really helped guide me. And I honestly think my patients helped guide me even more than anyone else, because it really became this moment of not knowing how to heal or how to navigate, but knowing that if I just kept doing what felt so meaningful to me and serving others who needed to be served as well, that they would serve me back. And so I really, honestly, my career, my work gave me so much meaning, and it gave me a way to sit in suffering with other people in a different way. And so I don't think it's a sequential thing, right? It's not like I can say I did 1, 2, or 3, and 4, but I think I kept looking, and that's the important part, is I kept searching and looking and sort of trusting that there
Mm.
had to be a way to live this life where you could thrive as well. I really knew in the very beginning that I didn't want to just cognitively get through this, because my mind is strong. I've done a lot of things with my mind. It's quite good. And I knew I could, mind myself through it, but that's not what I wanted. I wanted to really believe. I wanted to believe, like I do now, that my life is perfect. And at that time, it felt like that was so inaccessible, but I just thought there has to be a way. And, that's what happened. I just kept looking.
I think that's the most powerful part is that you opened yourself up. I think a lot of times when people are in situations like that, right? They double down on what they already know, or they double down on, I now need to go and do extensive research. Like they need to feel some kind of control of how I'm going to structure this or how am I going to move through this because feeling the pain and then feeling the movement, it's hard. What I'm really hearing is the fact that your form of navigating through this came in ways that if you didn't let yourself be open to, you would have maybe still been searching for it. You may have still been, or maybe have felt helpless about it or more frustrated. And then how that would have ultimately manifested into, what's projected onto your son, for example, and how he's
Yeah.
navigating his journey. Because although it's like, as a parent, I can imagine what the feelings are for you and, your partner and your husband but he's the one who's going through that life. And so it's like you need that community of healing for you so that it's like you can help him not feel less than.
Yes. And as you know, we share some cultural background that
Mhm.
most often in our community, it's not looked upon very well to be disabled or to have any kind of limiting challenges that could make you less quote unquote productive or
Yep.
successful. And, I really had to fight through that conditioning. But
Mhm.
I do think, what you're saying really makes me think about a really pivotal moment for my partner and I, which was in the very day where we found out. We had a moment of, hearing ourselves say, why? How did this happen? Why me? Why us? Why Zubin, which is my son's name? And it was this very pivotal moment of somewhere out of the ether, we said to each other, and we don't know who said it, we still fight about it, but someone said, "Why not me? Why not us? Why not Zubin?" And it wasn't like everything was easy from there or we totally got it or weren't screaming and upset and sad, but it did shift because we realized that question, why me, was just really arrogant. It implies that only people who deserve suffering get to suffer.
Right.
And
And how do we get to label who suffers, right?
right, like, why me? I've done everything good, or something like that. And when we said, why not us? It felt like, oh, wait a second. We're human like everyone else. We get to suffer like everyone else. And why not us also to have joy like everyone else? And so it was a very big question for us. It was a pivotal moment and it really helped guide us forward. And it really I'm thinking about your podcast name. I mean, it's sort of ironic I'm saying this, but it really did reframe our entire concept of what it means to suffer and also what it means to have the right to get joy.
I have 5 questions that are popping through my head all at the same time. I made, like, literally, like I told you, right? Like, a whole questions of things, and now I'm like, "Forget this. I gotta dive deeper into, like, this right now." But couple things come to my mind. When you started talking about just from the cultural notion, right? Literally the word that's going through my head is bichara. Oh,
Yeah.
bichara, right? And for people who don't know Hindi, bichara means like, oh, poor thing, and it's that oh, Bichara, like, what's gonna happen to him? Oh, Bichara. And it's just like all the fear that you then just like put through the veins of the body, right? And it's like your cells feel that energy and they're going to grab onto that. And I think that that story of why us, why me, could have easily gone into Zubin and him then kind of moving through life with shame and just becoming recluse and you see that it's like almost like hide them, like we don't
Yeah.
want them, we don't want to show them, we don't want to see them. And for to navigate that into from a place of again, right? Like looking at the role that subconsciously like privilege plays in our world and lives of that we would question that why me and for you to flip the script and to shift that like how can you say then that by doing that, and of course, like, navigating through the hard, tough moments that you still experience till today, obviously, how would you say that Zubin's siblings have then also taken that on and navigated that same story or their version of it so that, they're in this journey with Zubin?
Mhm. I think actually, I don't know if I'm really fit to answer that.
Mm.
I feel like that's their story. And I mean, I'm not even trying, I'm not trying not to answer it. I just think that I couldn't do justice to them. They have a lot of challenge around Zubin's story and their story with Zubin. It's hard and it's sad and it's caused a lot of mental health struggles, and yet they also can recognize, I see them do this, recognize how compassionate and aware and more inclusive they are than some others their age. I see them as they navigate what they want to do for a career. I see them turning towards and being more interested in things where there's human interaction and service. And I mean, they know that's all because of their brother, but I think that their story still has so many chapters left and it's a hard one, and I try to be just a vessel of love and support for them. I do my best. It's not always the case.
Like
And
men.
right? But I do think that there is no way that I can understand what their experience is. And so I try to imagine it as often as possible. You actually said something in the very beginning of this podcast that most people don't say. You said, I can imagine what you and your husband might have been feeling. And honestly, I mean, I wouldn't expect less from an empathy expert. Okay. But that is not something most people say. What they say is, I can't imagine. And I would just urge anyone listening to take the frame you did, which is, I can imagine. And for me to say, I'm imagine my kid's story is really hard. And I stand with them as much as I can. And yet I have to let go and know it's their own path. Right. And this bridge of imagination, I think, is a bridge of connection and empathy. And it's a way that we all could connect to each other a little better, honestly. Because when people say, I can't imagine, I just feel cut off and isolated and like I have that bachata life you're talking about, you
It's like
know?
you're othered,
Yeah.
right? It's like, oh, I can't imagine. So, okay, I'm going to go on a tangent, ADD brain here. That whole I can't imagine versus I can imagine. I feel like there's also a sensitivity towards that because when you're talking to whoever you're speaking to, right? So if we talk about grief and we talk about how when someone has lost a parent, and obviously like now I'm in my 40s and I'm having friends that are losing a parent now, it's becoming more prevalent. And there's this like pull and tug, even internally with me, of how can I say I can imagine how hard it is? Because then I'm thinking again of putting myself in the other person's shoes and just thinking of like, are they going to get upset that I said that
Yeah.
because I haven't lost? But then if I say I can't imagine, it's almost like I'm showing empathy of like, I understand how your experience is your experience, right? So it's just this like understanding. And I think that what I've realized is that it comes down to understanding who you're speaking to and understanding what state of emotion they're in to receive. So if they're in the emotion to receive, you being able to say that, I can imagine that as a parent, like, and because for me, I'm just thinking any parent, like having to think about their kid, what their kid's life is going to be. Because as parents, I can imagine again that your life is like, at some point you're going to be gone and they're going to have to continue on without you. So that's a hard reality for a parent to grasp, or if a child passes away before a parent, like there's so many layers of that, right? So even that words of I can't imagine, and the empathy that goes in it is like, how do you know when to say what to a
Yeah.
grieving person?
So people ask me this a lot, and I would say that I think you're right. You need to know the state people are in, but I also think there's just a better way to say both of those things. So, for example, if you say, I can imagine how painful this is, even though I don't understand your experience. Even though I can never walk in your shoes, I just can imagine how painful this is. That almost never is going to piss anyone off because you're going to say, I don't understand, but I can imagine.
Mhm.
Or I want to imagine. You can always say, I don't understand, but I want to imagine your pain so I can be the best person to support you right now, right?
Yeah,
And even if we say, I can't imagine, there's a way to say it where it's not how usually people say it to me. And by the way, let's just disclaimer, they have the best intentions when they say
absolutely.
that. And I actually never feel offended. I just feel like, oh, that didn't really help me. And now I feel worse. And
Yeah,
so this
yeah,
is not helpful, but I know where they're coming from. But you can say also, I can't imagine what you're feeling, and yet I really want to. I mean, there's just ways to say both versions that still offer the fact that you would never have the presumption to know their experience.
yeah.
But you can always have the assumption that you can be the most human possible in that situation and bridge that connection, right?
Yeah. I'm actually thinking about a moment in my own life where, and I think that it's also important to recognize that grief happens in so many different ways. And whenever we do think about grief, we think about like extreme trauma. But grief can also be simple things like losing a friend or losing a relationship, or, those are still pretty big things, but just as micro things. And for me growing up, like, it's like grew up with my parents, arranged marriage, right? Typical Indian background in that way. My mom never dated, she just met my dad and that was it. So her understanding dating for, us is like a journey. I remember I had a relationship like end, and I was like sitting on the couch. I was really upset. I was crying. And my mom, who's never done that, but she's obviously had a very long relationship with my father, but she said, I don't know why this happens to you, but I'm sorry that you go through this. And that alone, right? Like, it was just so pure and it was so kind because she's not trying to relate. She's not trying to say that I get it, I know it, because she hasn't, but she was just feeling the pain. And I
Yeah.
think that that's the underlying part, is that no one is asking you to step into the shoes. No one is wishing this on anybody, or that any family should be like, you should experience what we're going through, but it's just acknowledging the underlying feeling and pain, right? Like, have you ever felt so sad or helpless or hopeless or whatever it is, right?
Right.
Like, that's what we're connecting to.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I can't agree more.
So, the other thing that was coming up when you were talking about the relationships and how that's like impacted the choices that, your other two kids are making in career choices, is I couldn't help but think about like two storylines happening at the same time, right? And we all have our own storylines, but there's a storyline of Zubin and the role that he has played in your family. And the narrative, it's like the story of Zubin and the impact of that, right? But then there's this other story of like what it means for every single person in the family to lead their own life and to not be in the shadows of this big story that's happening in the family as well. So being able to separate that and do things that is like, this is my identity and story, and there's this concurrent one happening as well. What would you say that as your kids have navigated that and as you have navigated that, and when we talk about like finding those moments of joy and we find those moments of navigating those hard moments, how have you and your partner and your family whole found those moments of joy even with this big storyline happening?
Yeah. Well, a lot of it is because we don't look at it as a separate storyline.
Yeah.
It is just part of our family. And so, for my kids, I'm really clear with my other two kids that they don't have to do anything for Zubin just because they feel they should or have to, or, I mean, they want to do things for him, but they also are kids. And, my daughter's a teenager in high school and she wants to go out with her friends, and Zubin's home alone with us, and she feels bad sometimes, but there's nothing to feel bad about. She's living her life and she's with him a lot and she gets to be without him a lot. So I
Right.
try to just be really open to what they need or want. And, if you shouldn't pick your college choice based on him, you should, all of those things, you need to live your own life. I also live my own life. I don't not take a career opportunity or not travel on my own if I want to because I have to be. Of course, I have to arrange logistics. It's more complicated, but I don't feel guilty about it. So those ways of sort of owning that we all have our own needs and we have needs as a family it is a balance, I agree. But I think that, in a way, I wish I had learned that more, even myself growing up in a family with nothing like this, right? Because I feel like, I don't know about you, but I just grew up with a lot of obligation, cultural obligation of what I was supposed to do and what I should do. And it still lives in my body. I can feel it sometimes just creeping in, and it's taken me decades now to figure out how to set a boundary and live for myself. So, in some ways, I think that when you have this kind of challenge in your family early on, it could be the possibility that I don't know, but it could be the possibility that they are learning their own boundaries better at an earlier age, And I think joy is such a crucial practice. It's such a crucial thing to really question and understand as you're growing up, which, as I told you, I really didn't, so that you can understand what gives me joy. Is it being here with my brother when he needs me? Sometimes, yes, maybe. And sometimes it's saying, I just want to be with people and not be with my brother or my family. Like, I want to let all this go, and that gives me joy today. And so I think that sort of dance that we're all doing, I wish I had done it earlier. And I hope that it proves to be really fruitful for them. Because I just really grew up with a lot of obligation. And I can only imagine if I was them and I grew up with Zubin as my brother, I would have had even more obligation, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So, I don't want them to grow up like that. And yet they also are trying to learn what it means to be there for a brother who has high needs, so they're just doing that dance.
Yeah. I think that's the part. It's like it's normalizing it. Like this doesn't make it different or unique in the sense of your life and, you're a kid. So like obviously, and even if, right, like I was definitely the annoying younger sibling that wanted to go hang out with my brother and his friends all the time. And he was like, get away, and typical just dynamic of older sibling, younger sibling. And I see that playing out with my nieces a lot, right, with them. And it's just like thinking of it like that. It's like, you're not treating it special in the sense of what that means for the family dynamic so that everyone can normalize it. And again, it goes back to the whole thing of like, we're not going to make this into a bichara, poor Zubin, right? It's
Exactly.
a no, like, hey, Zubin's here. He's hanging out. He's doing his thing. You go do your thing. And I'll come back and hang out later.
Hi, so I'm pausing the episode for a quick moment and for a quick favor. If you haven't already, if you could just click subscribe, leave a review wherever you're listening to this episode, it would be really helpful. The only way we can know to make sure that we provide the right type of podcast episodes, the right type of guests, and to make sure that we're delivering the type of content that you actually want to hear, it's through your reviews and through your support. Thanks. And now back to the episode.
You've done obviously a lot of work in trauma and you've done a lot of work in marginalized communities. And, there's so much behind brain function with joy and the work of justice and systemic oppression and all of these pieces. But like, what would you say that when you've worked with your clients and when you've worked with patients that are understanding like that the work starts at the cellular level of, our bodies to be able to access this. But when it's so inaccessible, how have you navigated your patients and your clients to be able to like start to broach that? Especially if you're in a marginalized community, in a space that's very stunted, that is full of scarcity, is like your, fear mongering is there deeply. How do you navigate that with them?
Yeah. And I mean, the fear is real often, right?
Yeah.
Um, often it starts with just something similar to an exploration like you were doing in the beginning of what joy was like for you when you grew up, or what joy has been like in your genogram and your family tree and your lineage, your ancestry. Where have you seen examples of joy and where have you seen examples where you don't think it was expressed or it was squashed in some ways? And that includes systemic oppression, but also can include family cultures and other kinds of things that happen in life. I really try to bring first an understanding to what joy even means to my patient, right? I mean, what is joy? How did you see it? How did you live it? Have you ever felt it? And if not, then let's start by just lightly stepping into your body each day. And so then we try to flow in the area where joy actually lives, which is in your body, where all your pain lives and all your joy lives, and try to reconnect. And so after exploring what someone conceives of joy, if we can't understand what might be a first step to bring some joy, then it's about reconnecting at a nervous system level and a cellular level and saying, have you even connected to your body in any way recently that would allow you to know if you had joy, right? And so that involves different practices, like I talk about in the book, in terms of movement, in terms of self compassion, these things that people think are sort of woo woo and really are. For example, self compassion is a real superpower for finding safety in the nervous system. So how can we feel a little safer to explore joy? Right? Or movement or breath, which are ways to actually learn how to flow in your body a little bit and find joy and pain. They're both interconnected, right? So often I find that if somebody's having a real challenge understanding joy, they're almost always numbed because of a fight or flight trauma response, a freeze response, as people would call it. They're often numb and disconnected. And so we have to reconnect. And that can be a hard process, but it is almost always a very fruitful one. Because if we can get back in our body through different practices and somatic exercises, we can actually start to understand what we're actually feeling or not feeling.
What would you say, because I can imagine, now I'm so aware of that word.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but, I'm just thinking about even for myself or just with others that I've worked in that space is that when you first introduce nervous system healing or when you first introduce breath work, and even if it's like the simple, like one thing that you're helping them do, their body is having such a reaction of rejection for it, right? Because again, it's like that part of our body that's also just rejecting anything unknown. And this is like an unknown thing, even if it's good for us. That initial reaction that patients have with this thing that's good for them, but it's just like palpable. And so it's having the reverse impact. So then that's leading them to think that this isn't going to work. What are you talking about? This is all just a bunch of, you're putting me into even a deeper place of fear and freeze. How do you navigate that with them?
Yeah. And in fact, I mean, breath work can often make people more anxious if they're not comfortable with their breath or feeling safe in their body. So you're right, it can be harder. There's almost always a gateway. And so if breath makes someone anxious, we don't breathe, we don't do breath work, right? Of course, you're breathing, but we don't do breath work.
Intentional breath
Um,
work.
right? If it's hard, which this is often, very often the case, is people have a hard time getting quiet in their mind and really being in the discomfort of the silence, then we don't do that. We walk, we dance, we turn on music, we use other gateways. And almost always, I can't think of a time other than some very, very severely depressed with quite extensive psychiatric histories where we really had to work through with a lot of medication first. I can't think of other times where there isn't a gateway that we can find. And so it is a really good question because I think if anyone's listening, what's important to understand is that you have a therapist and or a provider medical team that is trauma informed and understands that there are different ways to do this. And also, there are ways that are not helpful, and to not be oppressing people further by acting like now they're even more broken that they can't do a simple quote unquote simple breath work, right? I mean, I think that's one of the biggest problems with the mental health conversation, to be honest, is that it feels really oppressive to be told that you need to hack your way through all these things. And if you can't, then you're worse off, that you're more broken than you thought. I mean, it's really oppressive. And so people need to find really good trauma informed providers who understand how to not further traumatize them.
There's so much you bring up the mental health industry, just healthcare and industry altogether. And that part of recognizing that if this modality is not working, then try a different one until you can get to a space where it feels like, okay, this is the way forward. And I think that the challenge is the fact that there's so much now, a lot of noise in this industry. There's a lot of the well-being trends. There's all this stuff that, again, I always believe in the intention is great, but as humans, we just swing on the pendulum too far. And so then we get to a place where it's just gone so extreme. And that's where then people start mistrusting it, because it's like, okay, you've just gone off to the deep end with this. So the person who has been going through and is trying to actually get better, now it's like, do these 5 things, do this 6 things, do this, whatever. And it's like, there's so much risk involved if it's not, like you mentioned, done with someone who can guide you through that process. And it can be, right? It can be riding horses, it can be, being with animals, it could be dance therapy, it could be art therapy, like whatever it is. But there's a difference between you just got some colored pencils and you're starting to like draw versus like having someone there who's guiding you with like thoughts and feeling like, there's a reason why like therapists who work with children, when they come in, you're not going to just have traditional talk therapy with them because a kid's like a
Right.
5-year-old is just going to be like
Right.
staring at you, but you have Legos and you
Right.
open them up, with that. But I think that one of the other pieces that you work on a lot, which I think is phenomenal, and you kind of brought it up right now, but it's the oppression that happens because it's like even mental health and the categorizing, the diagnosing, all of these things, it's to make it easier on the mental health industry versus it is easier on the actual person. Because what we're doing then is we're again going to this place of making people into this black and white space versus the fact that we are complex. We have layers beyond layers. Like we are like, you know, sand that is just like makes all of us up. But anyways, I'm curious, like, how do you then help someone who comes into this world of needs that support, but they're kind of scared. They're scared to
Mhm.
approach it because of, I don't know, it's so overwhelming. And then there's stigma on top of it of approaching this work of healing.
Yeah. I mean, I start with building a therapeutic, trusting relationship with the patient and starting to cultivate that trust for them with themselves. That's really the foundation of everything. So, if they can't feel safe with me or safe with themselves, then we can't enter into trying something new. And that's fair. They need time to feel safe. And so, it might mean multiple sessions of us fostering trust, of me holding parts of their story with trust and tenderness, with them seeing that I can receive it and not be judging them for it, for them to see that they can trust themselves. I really point this out to people, to patients I work with, that as they get a little deeper in the therapeutic relationship and they start to say, I'm feeling a little more comfortable, what I point out is that that's actually them trusting themselves to be in this new situation with someone they didn't know and be so vulnerable. And so vulnerable is a continuum. What you might think is so vulnerable might be not so vulnerable to someone else, right? And so maybe they haven't even told me that much, but they've shown up and come over and over. I can't tell you how many times, especially in the trauma work I do in the small group work, part of the healing, I don't even think it's part, I think it's the biggest thing. We learn all these practices, we have this safe therapeutic group experience, but the number one thing that I think brings people to a new level of healing is that they feel safe and held and not judged. I will tell you over and over and over again, that's what they say. And it's not because of me, it's because the whole container. I mean, I hold that, but it's this group having ground rules of how we operate together and be together. I really always think of this young man. He was 19, but now I think that's so young because I'm getting older. Anyway, so this young man who joined one of my groups, he was a patient in my clinic, but not mine. And there were about 5 or 6 other women in the groups, and they were all older, 50 or older. And he was actively using heroin and managing multiple mental health challenges. And he came to that group every week for 8 weeks. And these women were loving each other. They were connecting. They were just like loving this group and really vulnerable. And he said maybe 2 words. I'm not kidding you, the whole 8 weeks. He said nothing. And, in my early days of facilitating that kind of trauma work, I would have been thinking, oh my God, what's happening? Is he okay? Is this group okay? All these things. But I've so learned to let people have their own process. So even if he left without saying more, I would have been like, that's his process. But at the end, the very last group, when we closed, is the first time he said anything of substance. And what he said was, I felt so safe here. I have never felt like I could be in a group of people and they didn't look at me like an addict, like a loser. I think he used that word, just strung out. He used that word. I have never been in a group of people who just let me be myself. And nobody asked anything of him. He hardly talked, like I said. And what I would say is we all are craving that kind of acceptance and that kind of non-judgmental space. And it's very rare. And including me, every woman in that group cried the entire time he talked because it was this beautiful show of, I showed up. I didn't need to talk. You don't need to expect anything of me, but I was doing my work right inside of me. And I guess, I think about him a lot, even though it's been over 15 years since that group. But I think about him because everybody's doing their work inside. And I don't know. I'll probably never see what the seeds of that work is because it might come to fruition later. But it's not for me to hold on to or attach to. It's for me to just facilitate and hold the time I get to be with that person. And whatever comes of it will come of it.
Holy crap. That's so powerful. I literally have chills right now just thinking about that because there's so many, again, layers that you just talked about. One is even your own self of the work that you're doing as a healer. And even though it's like you're guiding it, you're not making it about yourself, right? And I think that's the part of letting go of, like, when you can't let go of a patient, you can't let go of their journey, and you have to know that's when you started to make it more about yourself. And that is something then it's like you need to take a pause and look at, like, wait a second, what kind of internal trust work or control work do I need to do about this? The other piece that I think is just so powerful that you mentioned is, and I tie it back to just like our culture, right? Like, he was showing up every single time, but it wasn't until the last time that he said something of substance. In our culture in America that we have, that is so ingrained with like hustle culture and just, corporate and all of that ingrainment of like maximize opportunity. When we see someone moving slowly, it's almost like brings up like anxiety in yourself of like, come on, come on,
Hmm.
come on, like go, 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 right? Like, why aren't you going? And I'm just thinking about being like a New York walker, like, a road rage in LA. So to even be able to practice to hold space and again, not convert it back into yourself, right? Of like, why isn't he talking? Am I not doing enough? Am I not asking
Right.
enough questions? And just letting him be is a practice of its own that I think sometimes change makers and people who are in that space struggle with because they directly consider their validation of their work tied to how much this person opened up. Like their KPI measurement, right? Is like, oh, look at this impact that I made. Look at like, and everything has to be this grandiose thing, but we've got to look at it more from a place of like micro. And again, removing the attachment of what does success look like for me as a healer and
Yes.
what does success look like for the patient.
Yes, exactly. I think you are hitting on what I think is a source of burnout for most people who call themselves justice workers or change makers or like us. I mean, I really think I tell the residents I teach this all the time that you're gonna burn out if it's not about don't take it so hard what this person said or did, or it's not that. I mean, you get to have all your emotions, but you're gonna burn out if you make your meaning out of your career about this outcome. It is not going to go very well, you know? And, this is a dance like everything else. I'm not saying you don't take feedback and I'm not saying you don't, change based on what you need to change, but it's about having the best possible intention and detaching from the outcome when you know you've done your best work. There is just no way that you can see everything. And in fact, I think you're right. It's not only hustle productivity culture, it's a world of extroverts we live in, right? And so I can't tell you how many I supervise people who run these groups, in the center that we run. And when they're learning, they just feel like, nothing's really happening. Nobody's saying enough. And I what is that about? People don't say things the first time they get in a group. You never know what's going to happen. And, it's this whole sort of expectation that people will do and talk and produce and show me everything. And, it's not really how it works.
Yeah, you talked about extrovert, like, I'm an extrovert, and I just thinking back to, like, when I was a clinical therapist, and definitely, there is that piece, and I've always read research about how, like, some of the best therapists are actually introverts because they will actually sit there and process and listen,
Right.
right? I think some of the most humbling experiences that I've had as a former therapist is actually when I did outpatient therapy working with severe psychosis in the geriatric community, and, I just remember this moment specifically where it was actually my last day in this workspace, and I was graduating from my master's. It was an internship that I had done. And there was a man there who was in his early 70s, and he comes from a very prominent family. He went to Wharton. He was an investment banker and everything. And then schizophrenia hit him, in his mid 40s and later. So now he's in this group home and, doing this outpatient stuff. Anyways, so when it was my last day, the nurse practitioner was just telling the whole group, like, well, today's Pyle's last day. And, she's graduating from her master's and everything. And so he's like, oh, did you go to Harvard? And I was like, no. And he's like, did you go to Berkeley? And I was like, no. And then he's like, where did you go? And I, mentioned where I went. And like, it's just, a regular, smaller private school. And he's literally was like, oh, and judged me for the fact that I didn't go to an Ivy League school. And this is someone who has literally lost a lot of his memory, really is more of a concrete thinker. But I just found such humility even in that moment, right? And I found such like that to me was just like I couldn't help but laugh, that here I am living a functional life and here's someone who was stripped of that. But yet there's still that little piece in him that exists from his former life, right? And it's like we're able to just joke about it, but it
Yeah.
really is that accepting it of to me, like, that was such a humbling moment. It's just a full of humility that when you treat people just for who they are, and not that he was schizophrenic or whatever it is. I remember even another instance there where, this is earlier in my experience, and because as an intern, I was not allowed to be in the room alone, and so the nurse practitioner, the psychologist supervisor would always be in the room, and anyways, the nurse practitioner had to run out to get some markers. So I was left in the room and there's, about 12 patients there. All have some form of schizophrenia or bipolar borderline, any of that. And as soon as the nurse practitioner left and I'm sitting there, they turned to me with big eyes and putting on their scariest face and were like, so are you scared? And I was like, no, why? And then they calmed down because they were testing me. They were
Wow.
testing me to see if I was going to bring my preconceived notions, my super, stereotypes with me. Was I going to do that in this room with them? So they were testing me to see if like I actually just accept them for who they are.
Yeah.
So that was another really powerful moment. But, what you mentioned about that with people who are doing work in this space, I think it's so important for them to continually see. And I want to know from you, what does that self-compassion look like for healers who are doing the work like you're doing? Because you're holding and carrying stories of other people who are marginalized, who are oppressed, who are going through trauma. How do you hold space for yourself?
Yeah. A lot of different ways. One is that, I actually never start seeing patients, I mean, including today, I didn't start without doing a little silent, you could call it a prayer. I have a Kuan Yin Buddhist goddess of compassion on my stethoscope, and I hold this stone and I say, may I have self compassion for all I meet. And then that same self compassion for myself when I have none for them, and it just sort of sets me up to understand that I'm only human and then I'll try my best, but I may not be able to do it. It's kind of, for me, what's important is how I start, how I go through my day, and how I end my day. So through my day, in between patients, I take breaths and just try to make space, literally with breath, to let what I have held kind of be lightened and make space for what I'm about to hold. But sometimes the stories are too big for a couple of breaths through the day. So that's just kind of like a maintenance thing. And then afterwards, I need to move or dance or shake or something like that to help myself release. It's almost like a completion of a stress response in the wild, just kind of letting it go. And overarching, I would say that I hold space way better over the last 15 years than I did the first 10 of my career, in the sense that I understand now that my joy is a way to sustain myself. And I used to think that I wasn't allowed, or it wasn't okay for me to have joy if the people I'm serving, which is always, are suffering. They're always suffering. And so I would feel like I didn't have room to have joy because I wouldn't be, then compassionate enough or with them enough, or, I would be too privileged to have a moment of joy, on and on and on. And now I understand that joy is more like fuel. It's a way to charge my cells and my battery, and to remind me that joy is actually what oppression wants to be squashed out of us. And the more joy I can have, the more I can fuel myself to hold everyone who doesn't believe they deserve it yet. So, I mean, those are really the ways that I do it. And I think that there are some days that are very hard. And sometimes even all of that means that I'm exhausted and I'm not sure I'm ready for the next day. And then I either go to bed early or, do something that will make me feel a little better, and hope the next day I can be, feeling better. But I think that those things that I've described really sustain me, because I mean, I haven't burnt out yet, and I am actually really fueled by my work. I just told a patient today, listening to their story, I just said, your story is just humbling, I mean, and it's almost in those moments where I just acknowledge them and how in awe I am of their story, that allows me to, it's like a moment of gratitude and awe for me. Like, I'm in a room listening to people's most vulnerable moments, and I'm not even their mother, or their sister. I mean, this is crazy, right? And often I hardly know them. And, that's a gift. I mean, it's a gift of connection every day. So, everyone who's out there doing that hard change maker work, and that work of justice and equity, and just trying to serve other humans, I think that we all just need to give ourselves more grace and give ourselves more moments of awe and gratitude, that, like, just doing that work is already successful. Like, we've chosen to be human. That's successful to me.
100%. I think the biggest thing there is, like, don't forget that you're also a human being, you know? I also often say that the work that we're doing is a marathon, and this oppression and systemic issues and things that have been existing for thousands of years. It's not that this is new. It's just that it may shift and pivot to which group is feeling it or which population is going through it, but this is going to exist until humans are extinct. So just being okay with knowing that I'm doing as much as I can and I'm adding to the intentionality of that, but I don't need to carry the entire weight myself. And I think a lot of times as healers, we think that we need to solve everyone's problems. And it's usually because we're distracting ourselves from solving our own issues. Just as a closing remark, I'd love to hear from you that we've talked about obviously some of the bigger challenges, but for listeners who are just thinking about it from just a day to day, like at a micro level, like what could be those like simple indicators of like bringing joy into their relationships, their family, their experiences, so that when they are serving, they're ready, they're energized to go out there and do that.
Yeah. I mean, if we were to close this and just say what were the, smallest things you could do, I would say the most powerful thing is to just keep turning towards the moment you're in. And I really mean it. I mean, when when I'm most stressed or anxious or overwhelmed, it's because I'm trying to be in 1,000 moments instead of the one I'm in. I'm trying to think about all the things I'm going to do, all the things I haven't done, and all the things I should be doing instead of right now, right here with my children or my partner or myself. Forget them. I deserve to just be in the moment with myself. And I really mean this. I actually don't think that self care and self caring and tenderness is because we need to be better change makers or mothers or sisters or whatever. I think that's all I don't like that. It feels like then I just trying to produce again.
Yeah.
And I think that we all deserve to take care of ourselves and be here because we're human beings
It's
and
like a
we're
fundamental
sacred.
part of us, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
We were
And we
meant
ju
to
like,
take
we don't need a
care.
reason for it.
Right. Yeah, I don't need to be a better anything. I just need to be human. And the more you can say, am I here now? Is my mind where my body is? The more you can sort of put yourself back in your feet while you're walking, put yourself back in your hands while you're cooking, put yourself back in your mouth while you're talking to your partner, your family, or whoever. Really, just I know that when I'm not here, I am stressing out about all these things that aren't even happening. I'm not even living those moments. So, the more you turn towards your life and find awe and beauty in it here, the more joy you cultivate always.
Ugh, I mean, I could just spend hours and hours and hours talking to you. So,
Oh,
thank you so much for just spreading your message and the impact that you're doing. And I literally feel it every time I talk to you. So, you are my dose of joy for sure. And I love
thank
what
you.
you shared at the end is that you don't need a reason to take care of yourself. You don't need a reason to enjoy yourself. And I'll leave it with this that when I was at Mammoth Mountains with my brother and my niece is 10 years old, went to go take a shower and without she's showering, she comes out with her towel wrapped around and being like, "Oh, I just took such a great bath." And like she had a bubble bath and she put like a kid's version of a mask on and she was just like, "You know what? I'm gonna go spend 5 more minutes in there." And she literally went in, spent 5 more minutes in there. And we're like, "Who is this?" But that was her moment of like, "I'm just enjoying the Zen. I'm tired from skiing and like I'm just gonna enjoy this moment." And it was just so pure and innocent and just lovely. And it was
Ugh,
just full of just
she's so evolved.
she is. Like, I'm gonna be unbothered with all of you. I'm gonna go. You can wait to play Clue when I'm out, but I'm gonna go back in for 5 more minutes. Thank you so much, Tanmeet.
Oh,
Honestly, I think everyone can benefit from and I hope everyone picks up your book and reads it because it's not just a compelling and powerful story about your life and your family journey, but it's really about taking it in for exactly what you said. And I feel like I'm going to keep seeing it over and over again is you don't need a reason to have joy.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Thank
thank you
you.
for having me. It's an honor to be in conversation with you.
I really hope that you enjoy this episode, and I just have one favor to ask you. If you could just make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a rating and review, it's going to help us tremendously to make sure that we reach as many people as possible that you think should be listening to our episodes. I'll see you next week for another episode, and thank you so much for leaving that one review, that one subscription, and sharing this with your friends.